Okay, sorry about that. I'm gonna just record the rest of this because my internet is really really bad right now. I don't know why it keeps doing this. It keeps having these random cutoffs. I hope it doesn't happen in future streams. Hopefully we'll have it fixed by next week. I'll have to talk to my provider about it later. But anyway, the where I was what I was talking about before the stream got cut off was that basically I'm a big believer of people should just know how to read the Bible and know the Bible stories, and not just like, well, one, not just have like references of just names and stuff. If I say like, who are okay, Adam and Eve might be a bit too easy, but if I say like, who are Cain and Abel, people should know how to answer that question and answer it well, not just say like, one kills the other. I think that's it. Like you should have a much more better working knowledge, and of course a big reason for this is because if you can read the Bible better, you can basically understand a lot about a lot of things. One, literature as a whole, and two, you can understand a lot of the human psyche. Because of course, yes, it is true that there are more primitive elements of the Bible, but once again, the reason why it appears primitive is because it tried to tackle ideas that were too advanced for the early Bible writers at the time. And that's obviously true. And some of those ideas that they were trying to tackle was a lot of the human condition and human psychology, among other things. But those are the ones we're going to talk about today. But basically, Genesis 4, if I say Genesis 4, you should know what that is. And I've already kind of given it away to you. That's the Cain and Abel story. Now, for those of you who don't know that story, and this, if you don't know, it just, I know this sounds mega mean, but it's a case in point of the problem of modern literature and, of course, modern education. Is that people don't, if you don't know this story, you should know this story. You should read this story. You should study this story. Genesis 4 tells you a lot about a lot of things. But basically, I dedicated a whole stream to that because, once again, there's just so much to talk about. So the TLDR of that stream is the idea that one of the saddest things about the human condition is that human beings are basically pre-programmed, if you will, to for violence. We are pre-programmed for violence. And this is shown in the Cain and Abel story. Now, I know a lot of people will only focus on Cain's violence. To be fair, he is the much more clearer aggressor. But Abel is also part of the problem. And Abel's part of the problem is that he gets too comfortable with how good his life gets. He gets too comfortable. He doesn't help his brother because probably presumptuous ancient culture ideas, which are permeated in any human culture, regardless of where you come from, regardless of your ethnic backgrounds and gender, even things like that don't matter. This is a proclivity in the human nature, is that people can become too comfortable, and when they do, that can cause envy out of other people, and then of course people naturally fight each other for resources and power and all that other stuff. And one of the things I talked about, one of my hot takes, if you will, in that story, which is really not a hot take if you actually read the Bible, and this is where, once again, part of my what's that word, my entreating of why everybody should read the Bible and know these stories and know them in depth, you would actually understand this pretty well, is that Cain and Abel are arguably probably the first real people. Now, I say that with a certain connotation to it. So, yeah, you could say Adam and Eve were the first human beings. Whether that's literal or figurative doesn't matter. But the problem with Adam and Eve is that they're not relatable to people like you and I, because they were created in the magical Garden of Eden, so they exist beyond our regular comprehension of humanity. Cain and Abel, on the other hand, are born, as they're both the sons of Eve. They're born and they live in the real world. They did not live in paradise. So arguably, they're the first real people. And of course, when I use the word people, I'm also getting at this fundamental Christian idea and Jewish idea as well, is the relatability and accountability that people have to one another. So in Christianity, you hear like Christians talk about how like the God of the Bible is a personal God. And many people misinterpret that to mean like, well, that means my Christian faith is like just for me, and it doesn't influence other aspects of my life, like people I interact with and whatever, which is kind of a ridiculous idea. That defeats the point of a missionary religion. But in actuality, what Christians actually mean, though a lot of them are pretty bad at expressing this, when they talk about how God of the Bible, or Jesus in the Christian context, is a personal God, what they're really talking about is how God is treated like he's treated like any other person. And just like any other person, we can and in a way must relate to God. And so he's a person in that sense. And so in the same way, Cain and Abel are the first real people, in the sense that they are people you and I we relate to them. Now, this is important because you read the rest of Genesis 4 and the TLDR. This part, people may have an idea of what goes down in Genesis 4. But basically, Cain kills Abel. And it's done out of like petty rivalry, really, in the grand scheme of things. But one of the bigger takeaways of this story, and it's actually kind of scary to think about it, and probably why people don't read this story, and on the one hand, I get why you wouldn't want to really understand this message, but at the same time, it's a problem if you don't, because then you can become blind to evil. And that leads back to the Ukraine crisis, which I will talk about in a second. But the problem in the Cain and Abel story is one of the sad realities of what that story teaches is that is the very nature of human beings, is to always be in this kind of really terrible rivalry. Wow. In this terrible rivalry, my Asian Tourette's came out. A terrible rivalry that will lead to bloodshed. That is in the crux of us as human beings and as quote unquote modern people. And this is where, once again, there's that disassociation from like Adam and Eve being like human beings and us being human beings as well, but we're also not human beings in the same sense. And we're not people in the same sense when it comes to relating with Adam and Eve. But Cain and Abel is totally different. Cain and Abel are easily relatable. But the problem is you have the first family, if you will, and how does it go down? Violence everywhere in this family. And it gets worse, because Cain, when God banishes Cain from the garden, Cain is all scared that there's going to be other people out there. And some of those may as well have included his other siblings, because it's not like Adam and Eve only had the 2 kids. They obviously had a whole bunch more. Adam and Eve had a whole bunch of other kids that would probably want revenge. And so it's literally just the first family all trying to kill each other, which is terrible. That's terrible. But it really, when you understand that story well, it really speaks into the fundamental problem of human beings in a nutshell. And it's the TLDR of it is human beings, as long as they're around other human beings, they want to kill each other. It happened way back with the earliest people, so it has continued on all the way to the present day. And so, sure, we can make compromises on like making alliances and trying to work together to make good civilization. But at the same time, humans deep down had this unsated bloodlust. And of course, I've read other Bible books to you, and a lot of that is kind of the case. King David is a definite example of that. There's just so much bloodthirst, and everybody just likes to fight. Everybody fights to live and lives to fight. And even in the 21st century, we like to think we're so evolved. We're not like those primitive ancient people. But and if we're honest with ourselves, we're not. We're not. Because the poison of sin continues on from day one and is the same to this day. Of course, this is where once again, the Christian idea is that, well, that's why we need Jesus. Jesus will be the one who not just purifies us of that, but will bring us out of that entirely when he returns. And that's kind of the crux of a big part of Christian belief. But going back to the whole thing with the Ukraine crisis, and we see this play out again, and we see it play out over and over in human history, because once again, as I mentioned before, humans have this proclivity to just bloodshed. We're obsessed with it. And of course, one of the problems that has led to stuff like the Ukraine problem is that we're so quick to judge when someone else exhibits that behavior, but because we've suppressed it in ourselves, and not just suppressed it, that's not the right word for it. It's worse than that. It's more like we try to completely deny that we're capable of evil in our modern world. We like to think, like I mentioned earlier, we like to think we're so evolved that that's not a problem for us anymore. But a line that always comes back in my mind, I've quoted this a couple of times on the channel, is from the play Wicked. You ever seen the play Wicked? It's basically the story of the Wicked Witch of the West. It's mostly a prequel, and then it also takes place during the Wizard of Oz story. A story everybody should also know. So the Wicked Witch of the West, I think her name is Gwyneth or something. Gwyneth or whatever. We'll call her Wicked Witch of the West. So the Wicked Witch of the West, she has this revelation, an epiphany, if you will. That's the better word. It's not revelation. It's an epiphany. And the epiphany is kind of the epiphany that Wreck-It Ralph has in Wreck-It Ralph. And it's the idea that she has accepted who she is, and that is the fact that she is not a good person. That she is the Wicked Witch of the West. She's acknowledged that that's who she is. And unfortunately, she can't change that. That's kind of the tragic fate of, like a lot of villains, is that that's who they are and they cannot change that. And so Gwyneth says this interesting line. She says, "Those who say they are evil are not that much worse than the rest of us. It is those who claim they are good are the ones you must be wary of." And here we go. Now we're going to go into the dicey territory. So YouTube might take this video down because I'm going to that territory. But that's exactly what has happened to our society. I'm talking mostly about North America, whether it's US, Canada, a lot of Western Europe. It's happened. We've fallen into that trap, and it's so easy to just point at Russia for being like terrible, because what they are doing is pretty terrible. But you look at what allowed Russia to do what they did. Now this brings me back to the beginning of the stream that got cut off. Sorry, my internet's being stupid, so just gotta deal with it. I'll try and fix it and have this video uploaded as soon as possible. But anyway, what I started the stream off with was talking about this question that people would ask when we were talking about the Ukraine crisis. And people would actually ask, do you think World War III is coming? And the hopeful part of me was thinking, like, just like all these other crises, eventually people will get it under control. Sure, it's not always the best way. For example, the Israel-Palestine conflict. It got put in relative under control, though the method, I don't know, it's a little shifty. I wouldn't say it's a good way of doing it, but the Israeli government found a way to mostly quell the conflict between Palestine and Israel. It wasn't a good way of doing it, but it was a way of doing it, and it got results. You think of the Syrian crisis. Not a good way that it got dealt with, but it got results. And it's because of that, people kind of stopped talking about it, even though there's still a lot of the aftermath, and there's still some violence going on here and there in those conflicts. And I'm only using those two as examples because the Middle East is easy to pick on when it comes to talking about crises. But you think of like a lot of the battles in the borders of North and South Korea. There's crises there. Maybe you never heard of those ones, but there are real crises as people try to escape North Korea and are gunned down as they try to escape. And of course, of course, it only gets worse in North Korea because South Korea has basically started to withdraw. They're like, we're tired of this, and so a very clear Cain and Abel kind of thing, where you have the complacent brother and Abel represented South Korea, and the aggressor brother Cain, as I've kind of made the allegory with North Korea kind of thing. And that crisis is still very much an ongoing thing, but you don't hear people talk about it all the time because, one, it doesn't make people money. It doesn't make the media money, so there's that. But when it comes to Ukraine, and people talk about like, oh, is it going to be World War III? And the hopeful part of me is like, well, it'll get quashed. The Russian invaders will get quashed, just like all the other crises ended up getting quashed in some way or another. But at the same time, you kind of look at how things have been in the political world. Can't really dance around it very much. But you can throw I'm not going to just throw insults and just talk about how incompetent the UN is. Clearly it is. But that's besides the point. But with how incompetent, and I know it's an old meme at this point, but when the UN is so boring that a guy has to go look at Tifa porn, Rule 34. Sorry, I can't use that word on it. Tifa Rule 34. When you have people looking at Tifa Rule 34 in the middle of a UN meeting, yeah, you can tell that like the UN's pretty incompetent. Like, why bother? Why bother showing? The guy could have stayed home and beat his meat, right? But like that's how useless they are. And when you have governments like that, and not just the UN, but all over the UN is the embodiment of all the incompetencies of all these groups. So basically, put it like, the UN is just a bunch of incompetent countries coming together and being incompetent. That's the best way of looking at it. I know I probably like dug my own grave right there, but it's the truth. Because if they were, they would have quashed this long ago. They would have just been like, okay, Russia, you're going down quick if you try this shit. But clearly that didn't happen. So, oof. And because of that, Russia has gained its strides as it has. And unfortunately, Ukraine are the people who have to suffer. And so, this brings me to the main topic at hand and the title of this stream/video. Am I my brother's keeper? This, of course, refers back to Genesis 4, where after Cain has murdered his brother, God asks Cain, hey, where's your brother Abel? And Cain tries to be a smart ass and be like, well, am I my brother's keeper? Which the rhetorical answer is, yes, you are. And I bring up those, and I don't think it's any small accident that it ended up being Genesis 4 and Luke 15 that get their own streams because of how important the message of being your brother's keeper is. And so the Genesis 4, what happens in Genesis 4 is that because Cain had failed in caring for other people through the person of his brother, a lot of his humanity was lost. And so, as I mentioned in that stream, that is why when God kicks him out of where they were living, and Cain gets all like moody about it, he's like, "Oh, I've been exiled by God. I'll just go somewhere else, and I'll probably die there." And then God basically tells him like, "No, that's not going to happen. You're going to live with what you did," because Cain is supposed to reflect on the fact that he is in fact his brother's keeper, and now he has broken that. He has quashed his own humanity by doing that. But at the same time, that's one of the interesting things, and I have an entire playlist on the Book of Exodus, so check that out too. But basically, when you get to the Book of Exodus, and you get to all the ridiculous laws God has, and he's got a lot of them, the fundamental idea is that what God ultimately wanted was for people to be good to each other. And so all of the laws were designed for people to not be asshats to each other, fundamentally. I mean, yeah, my way of saying it is a lot cruder, but that's the truth. That's basically what God wanted out of people. Because once again, one of the things that people misunderstand when you read the laws is like God is saying that yes, they're to glorify him and honor him, but at the same time it's like God doesn't need those things from people. So why would God tell people to do things a certain way? And the idea that the Book of Exodus was getting at is that God wants he is honored and glorified when people are good to each other. And so basically what God is trying to do with human beings is for us to reverse the Cain and Abel story. Instead of the first human beings essentially getting at each other's throats and killing each other, well, one killing the other, but you get the point. Basically, the first family being at odds. But now humanity has expanded to, what are we, like 7 billion people or whatever. Probably number's probably bigger. But you get the point. We're all supposed to be good to each other. That is what God wants from us. It's ultimately what God wants from us. And so, going back to the Luke 15 story, that was something that Jesus, through the story, was trying to remind the religious elite, which is something that applies to all of us, that we are meant to be good to each other, because ultimately, one, your humanity rides on it, and two, that was weird, but two, at the end of the day, our relationship with one another as human beings is the most important thing to God. And that's why back in the Luke 15 story, I ended it with, well, the story ended, and I ended that stream with talking about that interesting shift at the end of the story, that the relationship between God and man is not focused anymore in that story, but rather is focused between humans and other humans, and that we are meant to be good to each other, and that we are meant to restore life in one another. Your brother was lost, but now he is found. Your brother was dead, but now he is alive. And so, as this Ukraine crisis goes on, and there's a lot of death, as the Russians just go in and mow down people, we try to extend a hand of peace, but at the same time, people gotta do what they gotta do. And so, on the one hand, Ukraine needs to take up arms and fight off Russia. The incompetent countries of Canada, US, and the rest of the UN, they need to take immediate action, because they should feel like they have the moral obligation to help the Ukrainians, and not, oh my god, like I can't believe when there was that whole press conference with President Biden talking about a month. You think the Ukrainians can wait a month? This isn't XCOM, dude. No, this is real life. You don't got a month. But the big problem is that I think we've convinced ourselves that we're good, and we've neglected the inhumanity of doing nothing. So I'll end it with a famous quote. Most people should know this quote. It's by a dude named Edmund Burke. Actually, it didn't even come from him. He was the guy who kind of like penned the version we use now. But the saying that he penned, and I guess it's attributed to him, even though it's probably existed before him, is this famous saying: "The only thing necessary for evil to flourish is for good men to do nothing." And so, when people have deluded themselves in saying, well, they've claimed to be good, but don't do any actual good, Gwyneth said, be wary of those people. And it wasn't so much because it's good people who can do bad things, which is also true, but it's when people just claim that they're good, and then they don't feel the need to do good. And that's why Ukraine suffers. And, I guess my prayers would be that, a quick rise to action, and, maybe supernatural intervention for the Ukrainians that need protection. Of course, I also have a bit of a personal affiliation with Ukraine, especially in Kiev, one of the places that's been hit pretty hard, and Russia's wanting to take full control of it. What happened? I'll tell you a little bit about this group. Won't go into much detail, but there's a ministry group there, Christian organization, obviously, and I had volunteered with them years ago, almost a lifetime ago. It just feels that long. I was like in late high school, which was a long time ago. You guys know how old I am. I'm an old man. In late high school, when I was in late high school, I did a mission trip to Kiev, Ukraine, and basically and it translates to me as a person today. So this ministry is close to my heart, and it's a ministry that takes care of abandoned children. And we had built orphanages and outreach to reach children who have been abandoned, and to care for these children. And I had done like a summer kind of missions trip, is the fancy word we use for it. Spent the summer there, and it was a real eye opener at that time. And I guess it carries on to my desire to care for strays, kind of thing, I guess you could say. But with and those guys will always be in my prayers. The Father's House Ministry. That's all I'll tell you about it. I think I kind of gave away a bit much by saying their name, but the Father's House Ministry is close to my heart. And they're primarily stationed in Kiev, which has been taking a lot of hits from Russia. So, a lot of my prayers go out to them, of course. And I had been donating money to those guys for years, but I really hope that those guys are doing all right. I hope if you guys are watching, I hope you guys are doing all right, because I have nothing but deep love for you and everything that you do, and especially and I encourage you as well, Father's House. You guys are watching this. I encourage you guys to keep doing what you do, because they need you more than ever. And as I mentioned, the little crappy things that we can do, it's guys like you that are the real heroes. Those kids need you now more than ever. So, yeah, that's all I have to say about that. Anyway, this is going to be the end of the video / stream. Please watch both parts. And of course, watch the other streams that I make a lot of reference to get much more clearer context and understanding of my concerns and stuff like that. But with that said, normally I'd say I'd say if you got wishing you guys would enjoy the stream, but this is more of a real talk, and I don't think there's much to enjoy about real talks, especially in a sensitive topic like the Ukraine invasion. But I hope you guys learned something, and I hope to inspire something in you. I just pray comfort to Father's house and all the work you guys do. You guys are always close to me. But yeah, that's it. There's not much else to say. I'm not gonna bother with announcements. Normally I would, but one, it's just a video, and you guys can catch hopefully on Wednesday. Well, I'll make this one announcement because it's kind of like the next thing on this channel anyway. So on Wednesday, we'll be doing XCOM. Maybe we might start a little earlier. And we'll play XCOM at maybe 2. If it's not 2 o'clock, then it's 3 o'clock. We'll see. But of course, in order for it to be 2, I had to basically start right away when I get home. But 2, maybe 3, maybe 2 o'clock, but definitely 3 o'clock if I don't start at 2. And that will be Wednesday's stream. I'll be playing more of XCOM 2. And then, of course, we have Bible reading on Friday. And that will be at 3 o'clock Pacific time. So I ended up doing the announcements anyway. But anyway, I will go into more larger announcements on Wednesday's stream. I also need to get this internet thing fixed. So that's going to be a big priority right now. So I'll try to have this video up as soon as possible. But with that said, you guys, take care of yourselves. Have a good rest of your day. Pray for Ukraine. And I will see you guys on Wednesday for XCOM. Have a great rest of your day. And God bless you.